Get started today. Thanks for coming out to the next Hyde lecture this semester. My name's Jeff Day. I'm the director of the architecture program here at UNL. And I'm pleased to be able to introduce Tom Trenolone, who's a personal friend of mine from, well, I guess it was when DOMA started, so that would have been 2006. More or less like 8 years. So I haven't known him forever. I can't really claim that. But I have known Tom for quite a while, and it's really a pleasure to have him down here at the school. He's been giving talks at a number of schools, and I think we've managed to figure out a way to get it to happen here. Tom is actually a graduate of our program. He was an undergraduate student here in architecture and advertising. Was that a dual degree, Tom, or just? Okay, loser. Anyway, yeah. But he did go back to architecture. Tom went to the University of Kansas School of Architecture for his Master of Architecture degree, and there had the opportunity to work with Studio 804, which is a very well-known design build studio. Some of you are probably familiar with the work that they do, really all over the place, but mostly based in Kansas. Really phenomenal design build work that the students work on with Dan Rockhill, and that in some ways is where Tom really began some of the explorations that he's interested in now. So at this point, Tom is the director of the Great Plains Studio at HDR Architecture. He's based in Omaha. Great Plains Studio is a regional studio, and through this he has worked on quite a few projects that have won design awards, regional and national and state. He led the design of the Parkland Hospital, which is a $1.27 billion project.
Yeah, it's big.
Which is, I just can't conceive, since I design mostly small projects.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's phenomenal. But
everything's bigger in Texas, I guess.
Yeah, everything's bigger in Texas. And that is in Dallas, if you're not familiar. But Parkland is the hospital where Kennedy went after being shot, and so it's a fairly famous name in the world of hospitals. Under his leadership, Tom's studios have garnered over 70 AIA awards and other design awards. He's been featured in the New York Times, Architectural Record, Architect Magazine, Interior Design Magazine, Dwell, Wallpaper, and in the Venice Biennale. He's a recipient of the 2002 Kagan Design Fellowship and the 2009 Tau Sigma Delta Silver Medal, and the 2011 AIA Young Architects Award. That's a national AIA award for architects under some
10 years of licensure.
10 years of licensure, yeah. That's what it is. And the reason I know Tom is through Design Alliance Omaha, or DOMA, which is an organization that Tom founded shortly after moving back to Omaha from practicing in Texas. And Design Alliance Omaha is a nonprofit organization based in Omaha that is focused on the notion of creating an interdisciplinary culture of design in our state and promoting design in all disciplines. So when Tom began the organization and then asked me to be on the board, one of the things we did is ran a lecture series, and we've done a number of other things, including running the Pachacachas in Omaha. But it's had a great impact on the city, I think, in that the culture of design has really grown quite rapidly since then. And you can see that in the architecture in Omaha, but also in clothing boutiques, in restaurants, and just generally in the city. And I think that actually has a lot to do with what Tom did by starting DOMA. So we hope that effort continues, and the school certainly participates in that conversation. Currently, Tom has served as an adjunct faculty member at the University of Kansas, and he's also on their advisory council, so he's involved in architectural education as well as running a very large design studio in a huge company. So with great pleasure, I'd like to introduce Tom to you, and hopefully his lecture is as inspiring as his title.
We hope.
And so please give a hand of applause for Tom. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi. It is, can you guys hear me okay? Everything good? It is nice to be back. This year I've done, I was at SUNY Buffalo and University of Texas Austin, and it's fun to think that I'm actually standing at the Sheldon now and addressing where I used to sit, where you were at. Speed, Sex, Firepower is a philosophy and kind of a treatise that got put together after I did a Kagan Fellowship in about 2002. It's interesting though, when I sit here and I think about it, I'm a Nebraska native. This little chart here that some friends put together for me, as you can see, I was born here in 1970. My father moved us to Atlanta, Georgia, then moved us to Raleigh, North Carolina. Then we lived in Denver for a while. Got back to Nebraska in 1976, made it all the way to Creighton Prep, started high school, then moved to Longview, Texas, Matthew McConaughey's hometown. He's the same graduating class as I am, I guess. Then decided I didn't want to be a Texan and came back to Nebraska to do my undergraduate. Like Jeff said, I did an undergraduate degree in architecture, but I couldn't decide if I wanted to do buildings or beer commercials, and so I did an advertising degree as well, and you see where I landed. I ended up then going back to Omaha for a while, lived there, decided to go to Lawrence to get a graduate degree, used some Pell Grants to live abroad for a while, went back, finished that graduate degree, moved with my wife to Dallas and started practicing with RTKL, and then did a lot of international work. And then recently, about 9 years ago, we came back to Omaha, and I did the thing like Jeff said. I started really, as far as professional practice goes, I started with Studio 804 in Dan Rockhill at the University of Kansas. Spent a lot of time doing international work at RTKL. Started my own little think tank that's still going with a buddy of mine named Brendan O'Grady called the Nocturnal Design Lab. Spent some time here with Randy Brown, met some fantastic colleagues here, and then about 8 years ago, the president at HDR asked if I would come back and start a studio there, and we've been doing great things since. So I said Speed, Sex, Firepower came out of this idea of the Kagan Fellowship that I did, and it was originally titled Automotive Couture, and I really wanted just money so I could go hang out with the fashion industry and see how they worked and how the automotive industry worked. And while I was there and pitching my idea, one of the board members said that if I was really looking for innovation in really large organizations, which is what the treatise of the piece was, I should also check out the United States military. So it got added, and that's where Firepower came into be. The study goes into the fact that I got basically, with the money I had, I got to spend about a week to 2 weeks with each one of these organizations. Audi has a fantastic design studio in Simi Valley, California. And the thing is interesting about that is that the reason it was in Simi Valley, California is they really thought it was going to fail. They didn't want anybody to know that it was going to basically go belly up. And what it turned out to be is one of the greatest things they ever did. I mean, if you know Freeman Thomas, who was one of the designers there, he's the one that delivered the TT, the new Volkswagen Beetle, the redesigned A4. I mean, it was the thing that basically turned Audi into the powerhouse that they've become today here in the North American market. At the time that they started the studio, they were literally thinking of getting out of the North American market altogether. Now, the other one is Lucia herself, the grand priestess of Prada. This is the weirdest probably experience I had. When I showed up on my first day, I probably just wasn't dressed nice enough, and they really almost didn't let me back to spend my time with them. But it was an interesting experience in the fact of when you're thinking about big organizations, which is really what this was creativity in big organizations, is the iceberg that the fashion industry is. You know, you see the flagship store or something that REM did in New York, and you see all of that, but you don't know all the different companies that are feeding that empire of capitalism that fashion is. And then the other one was the one that I didn't expect, but it was probably one of the more surprising ones, and it was the fact that one of the board members had said, you know, you should really go talk to the Navy's Top Gun program, you should go talk to the guys in the Aggressor Squadron with U.S. Air Force, and then the Special Warfare College. And I always remember this one. It was pretty interesting. I was hanging, the Air Force guys were the ones that gave me probably the most interesting thing. This picture right here is Colonel Robin Olds. He is like seriously an American badass. The guy is a triple ace and married a movie star. He had this badass mustache was basically, he said, giving the middle finger to to all the people that were in the general folks ahead of him. So, you can imagine somebody like me that's in a big, huge organization, he's a little bit of a maverick. But he has this fantastic quote, and I want to read it to you, because if we split out fighter pilot and you think about designer, it might, they're one and the same. He has this thing where he says, a fighter pilot is an attitude. It's cockiness, it's aggressiveness, it's self-confidence, it is a streak of rebelliousness, and it is competitiveness. But there's something else, there's a spark There's a desire to be good, to do well in the eyes of your peers, in your own mind. And it's one where I think about that all the time. I said, there's a ton of competition between us as architects and designers, but I don't know a single one of us that wouldn't stop for a second and just kind of reflect if you had a peer that you respected their work and they told you that you were doing great things. So with that, here's the treatise of speed, sex, firepower. Speed, performance, efficiency, and profit. Now, this is the only part I'm going to read to you, but I wanted these definitions to be pretty specific so you can see this. Speed helps us perform in an efficient manner and grants us the ability to explore options. Remember, quantity of exploration is what leads to quality design. It also gets great ideas on the wall so they can be shared. Speed ultimately helps us deliver work and create revenue so we can sustain our design studios. Too many practices has overlooked this element, which has led to closed doors and the disappearance of many great creative minds. Speed encourages investigation, exchange of processes, sharing knowledge of tools, and allows more time for design exploration. And when I talk about this today, it's really, really evident in the fact of the things that the U.S. students are starting to be able to do in parametrics. Now, some people in the audience from my firm already know that these are probably already dated, but for a guy like me, when they first came out, like what it used to take me to basically do a parking layout, have to do all the calcs and everything, could take me 2-3 days. I can literally do this in hours now. Matter of fact, I mean, they can do it in an hour. But the cool thing about that is all that time that used to be this laborious thing of just trying out different parking layouts now allows us to focus more on other design. The other one too is I have a good friend that started Proving Ground, Nate Miller, and he has a saying that says that the spreadsheet is probably the most underused design tool out there to this date. You can imagine this as just seriously, probably like you and me, that a spreadsheet like that would put me to sleep. But once you start seeing it in graphs, the one thing that I'm really good at is pattern. It's finding those patterns. And those patterns are something that interests us and are able to go into certain things where we can pull data. Now, the other thing that we've done really, really well, where some of you are using parametrics to create patterns and be able to speed things up, one thing we've done is been able to match it with operational design so that we can actually look and measure what's going on. In this example here, you can see that we've actually taken people, matched them, and then actually gone through, and in this case, modeled them. So you can just see them going through their day-to-day. The idea is that it helps us do better design, and instead of being a subjective thing of saying, yeah, this will work better for you, the data is right there on the dashboard so that we can say, this is important, this is why you need to do it. This can also go to the point where you can imagine, as a designer, if you can basically nail square footage and cost, I don't know too many clients that as long as you can help them do their business model, won't let you be pretty generally outgoing with the design that you want to do. And in this case here, you can see the fact that as we're doing just simple adjustments to block models, you can see that the simulation that we just talked about is adjusted, but also the areas, and then cost based on cost information that's there. And it's one of those things, you don't want any surprises when you get into things, because then great things that are part of your design start disappearing because you can't afford them. The other one too is sustainability. The ability of having a great design coming back and someone telling you because of a model or the fact of where you wanted to go with lead that you can't do it. Now we have the ability for all that data to be done early on in concepts and schematics so that we don't go too far forward and have to add everything as a retroactive element. The other one too is the ability to actually work smarter and reduce that time in shop drawings. In this case here, this is a panels that we were doing for conference rooms in a project in Canada. Each one is customized, but the idea here is a script that we did with Case, and our folks in IALS actually developed this so that we could actually go through to each one of these, and then what it does is it prints it out as a script, sends it off to the fabricator, ready to go for customized fabrication. So sex. Aha, this is usually the thing as an advertiser, I knew that I got at least 2 extra seconds of your attention when you read the poster. But when we talk about sex in this philosophy is the idea that it's about the allure, attraction, style, and ultimate market presence. I don't want to read this to you so you get it. It's a fundamental element to a designer regardless of discipline and their practice, but it's something that can often be disregarded or neglected in a process or profit-driven environment. The world is all about attraction. Plants, animals, humans have evolved and developed elaborate methods of attraction. Design practices are no different. We work to produce the environments we design and work in we work to produce that the environments that we design and work in are directly linked to the clients we want to attract and serve. As a design professional, what type of client do you want to engage? When you answer this question, in the words of Yoda, forever will it dominate your destiny. Bill DeRoyne did these drawings for me, and this is an interesting one that we always try to tell people. And the reason I'm using like the Chrysler building, you'll see the Roby House in a second, is these are things that general people can associate with. But the idea of beauty, the iconic nature of what the Chrysler Tower is. Imagine if it had been VE'd. Would the Chrysler building still be the piece that we consider it today? Photographed, lauded as something really awesome? Or the Roby House in Chicago. If you sat there and you looked at Wright's, masterpiece here, but an engineer a contractor got a hold of him and told him he couldn't do that cantilever. Still an interesting house, but it's not the icon that we've grown to love. The ability to tell stories from the sex standpoint too that's what ends up selling your idea. This is simply a small graphic that we did, and it was just simply to tell the story of what happens as the sun tracks across the sky, both as a macro and a micro experiment. But the other one too is we always think about sex as an interesting thing at HDR, and the fact that are we able to capture popular culture? Recently, a project we did for the University of Maryland in their physics building was featured in Veep. And this is going to be fun for you, Chris, because they're basically shooting in Maryland, but they wanted to look like Palo Alto. So the idea is that this building could look both a Palo Alto-ish and high-tech at the same time. So you have to see if you agree with that. But here's a little snippet from season 4 of Veep.
This is what DC must have been like under Jefferson, except that would have been a horse, right?
I shouldn't say this because I majored in math, but you have my 1,000% attention.
Wow, that's a lot. I'm thrilled to hear that.
Excuse me one moment.
Childcare is a huge part of my campaign.
Oh, no, Craig believes that Legos are an important part of creative thought.
I'm taking these people back to dial-up. You know what I mean? They think they're kings of America. I gotta go to the bathroom. They have a bathroom here, they put their turds up in the cloud.
And as every architect, you want to have critical acceptance, but the other one too is that the idea if the public is embracing you with something as good as an Emmy-nominated show as Veep, you think you're doing something right. This is another thing I'm going to show you really quick is a cartoon about the way that we thought things should be working in the office. This is actually an example of something that almost got me fired. So when you look at this, it was one where this is the traditional work, the black cape architect, the talking about his minions to do his deeds, and the ideas of what an antiquated system that is. Something that, you recognize this one here where, the old prof comes in, tells you everything's wrong, you're in a fetal position for 2 days because you've been working for 2 days straight. But it's one where it's a lot about one person, and we've really entered a time where it's really about teams and more about editing. The idea that, we blame this one here, it's like the classic thing of the architect, blaming the contractor for not reading those documents. And it's one where we need to look at something more collaborative. But then even when we collaborate, we get into these things that are so muddled and crazy where it's just about, one part about production, one part about worrying about how the firm is going to produce. But it is something where it fundamentally goes through some of the problems, and that's what this is about. It really was pretty raw because some people, these are some really everyday things that people see. But what we were trying to navigate with this cartoon was simply the fact of where we needed to go. And that is the idea that what we wanted to do with Speed, Sex, Firepower, which actually introduced a mega level of collaboration with a lot of people. And again, see, even with this version here, it's just the contractor blaming the architect. All about not having that Revit model. But with this idea of Speed, Sex, Firepower, the intention was it's collaborated. It's based on a lot of the things that you as millennials have brought into the workplace. The idea of being able to do prototypes quickly, a little bit of D school mixed with traditional ARC school. And it is one where putting those options up there, allowing the process to be open to the group as opposed to that classic thing of us being closed up in a door and drawing away, waiting for the miraculous super thing to pop out. But you can see it's pretty raw. I mean, it was one where it was really telling people the way things were. But it was one that it really got the point across. And I found that it really has gained a lot of acceptance when we talk at the universities. In the professional set, it really is. I think it was too raw for some people. Now, when we talk about firepower, this is what we're talking about here. It's like the collective experience, capability, and leverage. Now, it represents what Van Berkel calls about in his essay, The New Concept of the Architect, about a hybrid mixture of club, Altair, laboratory, and car plant, encouraging plug-in professionalism. Firepower represents a conduit that enables greater outreach and allows us to open a dialogue between great thinkers and doers from around the world. The ability to focus great minds on a challenge rather than doing it independently is at the core of what we do as designers. In his TED Talk, architect Prince Ramos says, "This process does not have a signature, there's no authorship. Architects are obsessed with authorship. This is something that it has editing and it has teams. In fact, we no longer see within this process the traditional master architect creating a sketch that his minions carry out. The most successful practices of today do not depend solely on one name, but rather the ability to wield significant firepower. Even the big names. Look at all the great consultants that they're set up with. You're as good as the people that you surround yourself with." And we've been doing that a little bit here. Both of our consultants, like you've seen the stuff that we've done with Proving Ground, which was previously Case, the guys at Nephew, Spine 3D, Crystal CG, all helping us do visualizations. Some of the firms that we believe that we've partnered with. Now, we are not one of those firms where we're not the signature one guy thing. We believe that anybody that we work with, we tend to learn from, and it's one where we do our best to pick really great ones so we learn every single time we engage in a teaming opportunity. The other one too is in Omaha specifically, is that, Jeff's talked about it. I've been back in Omaha for about 9 years, and there's been an incredible transformation that's taken place in the city with things that were going on. And it was one where, as a part of the HDR studio, it was really important that we took part in those goings on. And that, one was the Elevate and the stuff that was done for stored potential when emerging terrain was operating. The idea of these going back to those Studio 804 opportunities to allow even a big studio like ours for people to get their hands dirty and actually fabricate, fantastic opportunity. And you can't knock out the fact that the engagement with the culture of the city, bringing people out for food, letting people see new design and all the different members of the design community that had done works. And then, like Jeff talked about, probably the biggest thing that we did is when Amy and I came back, Omaha didn't have a lecture series on architecture design. The Hyde has always been here, fantastic lecture series, and it was always sometimes difficult to get off work and get here. And so what Doma was going to introduce was a lecture at the Joslin at 7 o'clock in the evening on Thursdays. It's always been partnered with the university, partnered with the AIA. But it was one of those things that all of a sudden, we were able to start doing these elements here where we were bringing more than just architects in to see people speak, like Majora Carter here. And those partnerships, the idea of what we could find out and things that we could lead to with the Kineco, with IIDA, AIGA, ASLA, all the A's, the Joslin Art Museum. But the other thing that started making us feel really good as a board is that, like when Bloomberg did their first design series, when they decided that it was important, and this was in San Francisco, 3 of our alumni were part of their first group of speakers. And since then, they've actually added about 4 more. Since they've done 2 more design weeks in California. But it was that idea that Jeff was talking about, where exposing the everyday person to new and different ideas. Because us as architects, if we're going to stay in the Midwest and practice, if we don't do that, they're basically going to continue to go off that first-year student that walks in and tries to show you what they liked with their next-door neighbor's dad's den. I mean, that's the first project they do in studio, right? But we've brought, such greats as Bruce Mal and the folks from Snowhetta, Tom Main. And we've also reached out and done partnerships with organizations such as Film Streams at Omaha, where we've done, architecture, design, and film have been hand in hand for a long time. And we've been doing this now for, out of the almost 10 years that Doma's been around, the film series has been around for 8. But it has also helped us make bridges with the Omaha Public Library. The ability where we started basically consulting on them on what books that they actually put into the libraries in Omaha. And then also, we always take a lot of credit on some of the things they've launched. Like the podcast done by Amy Mather called What Other Mathers was basically blossomed out of her friendship with Bryce Bridges, who was a board member. These are just little tiny ripples that started off of that little group of people getting together and trying to do a lecture series. This is one where some of the people in the room that I just see out here have actually been part of this. Over 250 people have spoken at Pachakacha in Omaha that Doma runs. That was our answer. We figured the big lecture series was for the people we were bringing in from outside of the city, but Pachakacha became our vehicle to basically let people see the great stuff that was going on at universities, different businesses, artists, all local. And other things that have spawned off, like recently last year, around Christmas time, our board member, Bryce Bridges, had launched Flyover Magazine, which is now out and published and being circulated in Sioux Falls, Kansas City, Des Moines. And it all talks about the creative culture that's going on here in the Midwest. But other things that have happened in those partnerships that have kind of spun off from DOMA's original inception are things like Architecture Camp, where Mike Hamilton at my office started working with them 2 years ago, along with other architecture firms, where they do a week-long studio for kids to teach them about architecture, getting them hooked early. Minecraft is a great way to start them, and this is one to continue that. It's been very successful. It'll continue its third year this summer. Kids, if you know anybody, 11 through 15, I think, are eligible. But you can see the standard stuff of just having people explore scale. I mean, the stuff we take for granted all the time, especially in virtual worlds, it becomes something where you can get pretty out of touch on knowing exactly how big something is. And then one of the last things that we've recently done was, like Jeff talked about, at the University of Kansas recently, you know, HDR, we do a lot of healthcare, and we wanted to look into what we could do to address the issue of rural health. Critical access hospitals, all of them are falling down, they're in terrible disrepair. And the idea is that could we use that as an anchor that could sit there and possibly save Main Street USA? So we took a group of about 8 students, went through, did some case studies. You'll see this project a little bit later on here in the corner, that focal point, which is a idea of urban anchor and hospital in a urban area in Chicago, Illinois. But we used that as a precedent to see if we could shrink some of those, let's say, factors and use them to save a Main Street town. And in this case, it was Haxton, Colorado, which is a little tiny town in the right about, if you drew a hypotenuse, right smack dab between the end of our panhandle, that's where they land. And the students came through with stuff that might not, when you're sitting here from an architectural student standpoint, you're like, prefabrication, Tom, it's been done. But it's not necessarily being applied in trying to solve health and wellness problems. They did the final thing where I was really impressed that they did the 4 corners, and they had an exhibition for all the things that they had done, the students, and they pushed it up an extra week to do this, and I was like, gosh, I really think you should work an extra week. But they had over 350 people show up for the gallery exhibit and sit around and talk about this. It was incredible. So if I do all this stuff, and I've just told you about the philosophy, I'm sorry about this. I really looked for a better quote, but this is about the best I could get. We need to apply our philosophy, and what I'm going to show you kind of in rapid fire succession right now is like, we've taken some of these ideas, and some of the folks in my studio have applied them to work that we've done. The other thing that you're going to see is that what we've tried to do as a studio is that Jeff told you, he's talking about Parkland. I mean, it's a big project. But I always remember a professor telling me, if the first thing that you talk about is the number of square feet and the cost of a project, you really don't know what architecture is about. So we try to do this thing where we try to stretch our studios, where we go to something very small, sometimes maybe 10,000 square feet, all the way up to something where Parkland is almost 2 million square feet, and try to make sure that we keep ourselves stretched so that we don't get comfortable. You know, you do a diet of big all the time, and sometimes you can get desensitized to little tiny things that make the difference in architecture. So the first one here is the Fire Beach House. And the Fire Beach House is kind of one of those things that if you haven't been to Oklahoma, and it's hard because it's on the airport, so you can't really get a chance to do this, but one of the greats in our region is Rand Elliott, and he did a snow barn there that is the most awesome shed that you'll ever see. Totally little tiny, it doesn't have anything crazy about it at all, but man, it was badass. Then the idea of these elevated houses on the Galveston beach because of the issues of hurricanes. And then I don't know any guy that's out there, girls I'm sure are probably there too, that didn't want to have that awesome mustache and jump on the fire truck, and so doing a firehouse is kind of a career exciting thing. The beach house is set up so that the previous one was actually set up so that it was one story, and that when the flood surge came through in the last hurricane at Galveston, most of it was torn up and destroyed. So we took the idea of actually raising it to the point where pretty much all of this stuff here could rip away, and it would leave all the critical facility stuff up on the second floor. It has a mid dock here, so there's certain storage that we could put in there. This is about the height of the 1,000-year waters where it would come through, but it's set up so that the bays could actually break away almost like a tearaway jersey and take those panels, and they would take all the machinery to high ground and everything, but that leaves this so that quickly they could return and actually use it for operations. It was one of those things that it's right by the airport, but it also has a view of the beach, and so therefore we call it the Fire Beach House. But the idea of this translucent, all this right here comes from that study of the great stuff that Rand did in Oklahoma. So, I mean, a lot of these that you'll see that as it's studying and looking at some of the great stuff that's going on around us. The bummer thing is that we knew this as an airport, and we studied all the things about the airport equipment, and most airport equipment is green and yellow. But since this is also a local fire department, we kind of lucked out in the fact that we ended up getting a red fire truck. So simple structure, like I said, plan-wise, we have this basically here is almost like a bridge abutment so the water can flow around it. This is the concrete. Almost all of this here, except for the steel structure, can break away. Up on there, we have a large deck that can look out both ways, both for flight operations and then out to the ocean. The ability for the berthings here, and then this is the day area with the kitchen. And then again, this is the other one too, is we couldn't find any of this stuff in green, so we had to go with red. Have to check that next time you do a fire station, just double check it. That kind of surprised me. Artworks is a project that we just recently completed in Omaha for the Jaws and Art Museum. It was done by Bill Duroin. And I look at this one though, this is one of those moments where I was more of a, let's say, I'm no longer the director, I'm the producer on this one. Bill pretty much carried it. But I always remember it as this, is like those of you that have kids, it reminds me of the basement. It's in the basement where you throw kids and their toys. And the idea that they took Chihuly, even no matter what you think of Chihuly, and then the idea of light and grass. That's how I approached it. It's a small space. You come in, the idea that the softened curves and the elegant ability to flow, very childlike. But at the same time, what I loved about what Bill did is it's not, it doesn't cow down to kids. It treats them with a little bit of intelligence and fun. These beautiful little nooks, the ability of, the scale's just right. The other one too is I don't know how many of the older people in the audience, I always say this, that they used all these beautiful translucent plastics that they can go here, and this has been inspired by the Chihuly sculpture. But when I was a kid, there was crystal climbers. How many people that were born like in the 70s remember crystal climbers? Oh, geez. All right. I just told Bill that he reinvented crystal climbers, but evidently, so it's fallen away. Of course, you can see that how form and light take a major part in what's going on. Materials, softness, rounded corners. They're not necessarily being there for just stylistic reasons. They're there for a purpose because of the children. The idea of everything is interactive, very tactile. Bright colors. And generally it has been met with incredible positive result. And it's fun. I know my kids like hanging out there. As Jeff talked about, Parkland 3.0. Parkland is the one where we take that, where you just saw we had something that pretty much Bill could make a model and move it around, be able to see every side, and then we go to something that is gigantic. When you see this on the skyline, there was always people that asked if it was overscaled. It's one of those situations where you had the program, you did the best with what you could with it. The interesting thing is about the same time that Parkland's going on, unbeknownst to us, is that the horizontal skyscraper that Stephen Hall's doing is going on, so this zeitgeist is kind of taking place. And it's one of those situations where I think when you see what's going on with Parkland, we hadn't seen this yet, there's amazing similarities. The other one is that we wanted to be very sensitive to the fact that some of the stuff that's been done in Dallas recently almost harkened to Fort Worth, and they're two different cities. Dallas is much more modern in glass, and we wanted to see that represented. And then the other one was that the original master plan, the team that we beat out had done this gigantic Central Park in Texas, and anybody that's ever been to Texas knows that Central Parks aren't really that well attended because it's just really freaking hot. So we took the idea of what they've done with old railroad trails and others, is just using them as shaded places to move from one place to another. So we're in Dallas, which is right here. The interesting thing is we're in the medical district, which is over here where you can see I-35, the DART rail, and then the Trinity Railway Express are both there. Interesting thing about this is actually the medical center district has actually got a higher population than the central business district in downtown Dallas, which is one of those things where, again, that goes back to the idea of hospital is this urban anchor, because you have such just a massive concentration of people. As Jeff talked about, this is the old hospital over here. This is where Kennedy was taken after he was shot. And then this will be the new site, which is across the street, and then they have a land bank, which is here for possible future development. What we did here is you can see that also the idea was that eventually, from an urban standpoint, the new green line goes right past the hospital here, and then the railway express, which connects Dallas and Fort Worth, is here. And so this boulevard that goes underneath the hospital is intended to connect those so that in the future, that idea of being able to just walk down and use the trains as opposed to having to use your automobile will be there. I'm going to let this play really quickly. There we go. Sorry. So you can see here in the foreground, this is the parking garage. Oh, every time I use the clicker, it's going to do that. Oh, sorry. All right. Sorry, everybody. You can see this, the main part of the tower. So there's two towers, and you see the L-shaped piece. That's the med unit. This long linear piece that we're looking up here that's underneath the cantilever, that's mostly women's and children's. The interesting thing that was going on is they wanted to have these separate, but they almost wanted two different hospitals. We couldn't do that. They had to be intertwined. And so when you see the cantilever and then the space that exists between kind of where the little panhandle comes over there, that was done so that we could separate those two components. You can see here it's directly adjacent to the rail line where you can actually come down the stairs, walk right onto the property in the park. The interesting thing in Texas is they require all the patient rooms to actually have windows, and so as you see these cutouts on the roof, those were done so that we actually had light wells for each one of the NICUs. And the NICU was so gigantic that it literally was the thing that determined what the shape of the plate was going to be. You can see, sorry. But it's one of those, the other thing that was going on is what we tried to do is make sure that any circulation that was going to take place when you are not escorted in the facility actually took care on the perimeter so that you didn't have to worry about getting lost in a myriad of corridors. You could always see outside. The other one too is in the lobby as you come in the front door here. You would either make a turn to the left or you go straight ahead, and those were the two decision points that you had other than going to the cafeteria. And you can consider with like we said, how many billion, for $1 billion and almost 2 million square feet, that idea of wayfinding is extremely important and something that would cause a great deal of anxiety. The concept that was originally done by SOM, who did the master plan before we won the building itself, was the idea of putting the park back in Parkland. And so almost all of the major public spaces look out onto green spaces. They're either using it for the idea of linear parks, or cafes, or in this case, this is a respite park, which we use water features and stuff to help humidify the air. Almost 800 rooms in this one, but each one independent. In a lot of ways, the rooms become a microcosm. They in themselves prefabricated bathrooms. So prefabrication, they were done in a warehouse, trucked onto the site, lifted up by crane, and then just kind of plugged in. Just had to do the stub outs for the plumbing. And this is what it looks like today. The one thing that you probably noticed in the video is it was a much more monolithic building here. We lost out to the nurses. They wanted to have completely clear views, no frit on the glass, and so that's why it was there. And then it was funny because that was another one moment that we sat there and said that was like a Simmons Hall kind of Stephen Hall moment when it kind of went there. You can see, like, this is some of the stuff I was talking about. That basically the surgery and also the delivery were one of the things that defined this square, along with the NICU here. The punctures here to allow for each one to have a room of its own or a window of its own. This idea here, where we had this elevator core connects all the floors, but it allows this part, the wish clinic, to spin out here and allows it to be separated from the med-surg units. So it is an independent in itself, but directly related to the combined parts of the hospital. We ended up getting a little bit more work because we used the clinic to be the foot to hold that down. So a direct relation to the women's and infancy specialty clinic, right to that part of the hospital that they're associated with, trauma specialties, and then of course, traditional med-surg with regular public elevators and then service elevators on either side flanking. But you can see here this idea of the Trinity Rail linear park looking straight into the main part of the building here. All the entries can be seen. I'm not a fan of the hamster trails that medical facilities can turn into, and so we made every attempt to either tuck sky bridges underneath other parts of buildings or hide them altogether. But the green spaces were very significant in the fact of being able to have that respite, especially in a large urban setting like this. The idea here is you can see the rooms, each one independent. That original six-pack decided how big this bar was going to be. And then you can see here is actually the fabricated bathrooms being brought there. And it's amazing because I always thought it was going to come on a semi and it was going to be really, really cool and they had big cranes and stuff. It literally shows up on a truck like your Uncle Joe has and they just give it to the crane operator. The other thing that was unique about this is we took the idea of, like Jeff said, $1.27 billion, and that's a bond. That means that the people of Dallas allowed themselves to be levied a tax so that they could sit there and actually build this facility. So in that sense, what we did is we took all the names of the people that voted in Dallas County for the bond, and we actually put their names into the solar screening of the building. Now on the outside, as you can see, it makes the idea of a canopy for Parkland, an abstraction. But if you come into the facility, you can actually go in and find your name in here as part of that. And it was a study that we went simply with light and dark, light and bold text is what ends up doing the positive and negative shapes. And you can see the kind of nice dappled light that comes through there, especially on the south elevation. And then as you walk away, you can see this kind of vascular pattern that shows up here. The other interesting thing is that the vascular pattern opens up on the south, and then as it rolls around to the north side of or the west side of the building, it becomes full summer canopy so that it actually does more work to knock down the sun. So we have about 70% openings here on this side. By the time we get to the west, we've closed that down to almost about 95. And again, this is just simply talking about that concept that we were talking where we have the green line and then Trinity Rail, and you can see that the ability to just look out there and see the platform was very important. The other one too is it's kind of cool, geek out, you can imagine with the firepower bit that we literally have more helipad space here than on an American naval frigate. Can handle 3 helicopters at one time. Fantastic view of the city. Probably one of the most beautiful perforated and galvanized structures that I've had a chance to put together that nobody ever gets to see because it's on top of the roof. And then again, these simple ideas of being able to see out, walking around the corner, walking directly to an elevator, and being able to see all the circulation that's taking place in a really efficient lobby. And this is one where another kind of little firepower thing where we have played around with a friend of ours, Farshida Sassi, wanted to do a little video. And so there's a lot of people that always ask, like, why are you doing this? This is a healthcare building. And we were like, well, it's not about healthcare at this point. It's still a building. It's still about architecture. That idea of, that beautiful view, I mean, the city of Dallas, it's amazing how this thing commands it. And you'll see at the end of this, just the scale that this thing has and what it did to the skyline. I remember Dr. Anderson, who was the gentleman that made this happen. He was the one that pushed through the bond. We were talking one day when we were doing a model review, and he said that, asked me if I had seen the Cowboys game the other night, and I said I had not. And he said, well, the blimp shot from where they took it the other day will never be the same once the building goes up. So you can see that in the comparison. I mean, right over here, you can see the planes flying around from Love Field. We had to get a 120-foot variance because we are semi-exposed in the approach. Beta test. This is an example, if you've had a chance to visit us in Omaha, we are in the process of doing a new design for a new headquarters where we'll move in a couple of years. But we took that opportunity to basically rip up some stuff and beta test this idea of how our new offices could function in the future. And it was inspired by the D Studio, the idea of my niece's mood ring, and then again inspired by the great things of flyover country. And you see that when we got there, a lot of people, it's interesting that we had people that were looking up the ways to take down cubicle walls on the internet, and they would do it at night, and then they would hide the cubicles somewhere because they wanted to open the space up. So we kind of took the cue and started moving around, and we got the permission to basically redo our 5th floor, our library. We got to do a new cafe, and then an auditorium for the building. Each one has a kind of color theme, and the magenta was one where it was a little controversial, but magenta, if you don't know from a mood ring standpoint, it is about conflict resolution and creativity. And so we went through, and the other one is we wanted to do something where we were adding splashes of color in places where we could fix it later if we wanted to. So very white palette on most things that are expensive, and then carpet tile and others are where we're getting our color. The other one too is we took the idea of some great people in Omaha and used them to become the for lack of a better word, theming of the conference rooms. But the idea of Malcolm X, Richer, Mr. Payne, the idea of the circular pivots. More controversial is Jenny Lewis. We wanted a girl, so it's like Saddle Creek Records. Jenny Lewis will do that. The other one too is just it was a simple place where it was much more social. Collaboration was number one. We also did the thing where we changed from primarily, I think we were at about 40-60 on laptops to desktop units, and now we're at about 98%, where we are pretty much 98% of the staff is on laptops in architecture. The ability to unplug and go places. Opportunities to have visual co-presence. This is one where our materials library looks right back up onto the main floor. Lots of shred spaces. This is one where this is what we call this the pre-function, but it's set up so this entire wall is writable. The ability to project on this wall here so that you can have a Google search going on while you're still working on a live model. We've done that where white walls have become almost our digital bumwad. It's become our standard practice. But the idea that these spaces, simple white, but they get groups of people together. And it's one where we are co-located with our engineering brethren, and it's one where these were opportunities where we could have those cross-pollinations take place. We have sushi every day. But no, what we did do is we introduced a new it's like a new cafe with the ability for televisions, recycling, honor vending, but also food that comes in that's available in the morning and evenings. And it's actually a nice place to go have a meeting on a day when after everybody's cleared out from lunch. And again, we spent some time with Farshid, let him do another video on this one just to kind of mess around with visual, that idea of experiment. Another interesting thing we did, this is we've gone to the point where we pretty much only have about 3 offices for people in there, and everybody's moved out to bench spaces. Okay, another one that we've done, this is a project that was primarily designed by Kevin Augustine in our office, another alumni from Nebraska. But it's a digital library prototype called DoSpace. And those of you who are familiar with this project, it is literally, if you remember this is the borders at 72nd and Dodge. So we've got a great opportunity here where you're taking big box and finding a new opportunity for it. The other one too is it's located pretty much almost in the center of the city. I know that's technically been considered to be moved to 90th and Dodge, but it's here. Kevin found this, which is interesting, which shows kind of the dispersion between, probably African American, Hispanic, and Caucasian members of the city, and the fact that it shifts to pull those people into that space. It's a simple design that goes through. Aid is going. I think you noticed already is that's where the Dunkin' Donuts goes in. Back of house, main area here. Kids spaces in the back. Maker space here. Conference rooms. Upstairs is Metro Community College is going to have a satellite facility. And you can see that Kevin, when he was working on this, put this together so that he had the ability of these blocks, which each one had these content that they needed to be able to meet. And going through there and making sure that the maker spaces were on direct display so that people can see what was going on. It's again going back to some of the things we talked about when we founded DOMA. It was like getting that idea of making, being part of creating things out in front of people as opposed to hiding them away somewhere. And you can see that pretty much true to life. The colors changed a little bit with the branding, but for the most part, the ability is the way that it was designed was executed in the plan and the construction. Goes through, you can see this is the main check-in desk, and then it comes around here in the corner looking back, but this is the main computer area. Basically uses the same set of stairs that were there, elevators still in place, none of that stuff was relocated. But this ability for people to come together, and it's one of those situations. I saw Kevin in a video recently, and it was one where the idea that 60-year-old grandparent could come to this place and hang out, and their 5 or 10-year-old child could teach them how to engage in digital media or making. And then these are the spaces that they haven't been photographed yet because they're not complete, but these were the spaces upstairs for Metro Community College. And you can see telelearning, but then also just general studio spaces, very similar to what we do with our spaces. Very flexible, the ability to kind of make your own space. And then not much money in the budget to oversee the exterior, but enough to go through and know that, signage at 72nd and Dodge is important. But, I mean, nicely done for what limited budget they had on the exterior. Another project that we recently did, and this one again goes back up into scale. You saw that was small box. This one goes up to the idea of Ability Lab. And the Ability Lab was something that IDEO came up with for our client, the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, which has now been renamed the Ability Institute of RIC. And this is one of those places where you're surrounded by brilliant clients. Joanne Smith, the CEO and doctor, Dr. Ted Kagan, who has actually done TED Talk, but he is the doctor that has figured out exactly where all the neurons are so that you can actually connect right here so that you can actually have an armature that is working with a prosthetic that actually responds to what you're thinking with your brain. And then, of course, this is another one of those moments where the opportunity to do a building in Chicago, a kid that was born in Omaha, to be able to do something even though it's not going to be a skyscraper, Chicago, great option. So it's located here. You can see here that Navy Pier, so this is Streeterville. So here's the river. Right there, John Hancock is right off to the side here. You can see that Playboy building. This is actually looking down from Hancock. So this is the existing RIC, and this is the new site. The idea that they talked about here is we came up with what we called Blue Space, and this was something that transformed the way that we work as a practice. We established this studio with Gensler in Chicago, and this is one of the first times that we went to all whiteboard collaboration spaces and the ability of main design taking place in that group studio as opposed to independently. So I'm going to let this is one where a lot of the stuff is not allowed to ready for prime time because of competitors and stuff, so I'm only allowed really to show you the video, but I want to give you a chance to see what's going on. The building is basically about 7 stories of parking, an additional 23 stories worth of building. So the crinkle here on the north side is where the Ability Labs will be, and that was the one spot on the site where we have a clear view out to Lake Michigan. It's using the standard tactic in Chicago of coming in on a small lobby here and then zipping you up to what is the sky lobby here above parking. And then that opens up to a rooftop deck that can be used for both therapy and just general recreation. The beautiful thing that we loved working with Joanne was that Joanne believed that, healthcare needs to show the way to the future as opposed to the comforts of the everyday. And so it was fun to work with her because we never seemed to be able to get it modern enough for her. This is the roof garden that we just talked about. That looks back off to Northwestern Medical Center. These different areas have both different fragrant plants and then textures on the ground so that they can actually be used for therapy. Independent rooms. But the interesting thing that you'll see here is that the rooms, the research, and the physicians all share a single floor for a translational mix. So the idea that we can get research from the bench to the bedside as fast as we can. And this is one that was really difficult to work with some of the researchers because they didn't like being so openly present to the patients, but that was all part of the concept and the fact that they could see what they're trying to solve on a daily basis. The idea that even communicating stairs are actually turned into therapy elements. But it sets up one where you take these places of inspiration and make sure that they have beautiful views out to the city. And then when you look to the main part of the building in the evening, that those are the main elements that light up and kind of give RIC its whole meaning. I was just there on Monday, so I went and snapped a couple photos. So you can see that we're almost to the top there, perma-Silesia glass. It's set to open up in about, I think it's spring of 2018. And the last one I wanted to show you is another one that this kind of inspired the work that we did with KU. And it was inspired by this gentleman here, Guy Medaglia. He was a big-time consultant. He used to go in and kind of like the Pretty Woman guy where he'd break down things and sell them off, you know. And one time he showed up to tear apart a hospital in Chicago. He was there, he was sent to shut it down. He was going to sell it off. They weren't making any money. And when he got there, he fell in love with the community. He decided that he was going to give up his life of making tons of money as a consultant and become the CEO of this hospital because he wanted to take care of people like Andrea here in the little village and then people in North Lawndale. But it was also this idea of, you know, this grand experiment that's going on with us reforming what we think healthcare is going to be. And so Guy's concept was the idea that the hospital would be the anchor to a mixed-use development on a set in a food desert, in a retail desert, in the middle of one of the toughest neighborhoods in South Side Chicago. We also did, this is an interesting thing, with the University of Nebraska. When he didn't know if his concept would work, we actually came to the University of Nebraska and they helped us do the research to find out that it would be a viable concept. And it was one where each of these different sectors was polled and we found out exactly what type of components and everything that could be in the mixed-use mix, along with the hospital. This is just generally giving you a concept here of here's the interstate here, the site, the existing hospital's here by the park. This is the main retail spur through the little village. So 11 acres. The idea that one of the aldermen wanted a soccer pitch, but it was about having wellness be a central part of this, and the idea of community. And so the green became a very important part, that and the outdoor basketball courts. Now this is another one too, that when we talk about speed, sex, firepower, Matt Goldsberry was working on this job, and he put this together where literally we were able to do I think we did 17 different iterations on a master plan for these folks, and being able to go through with this Grasshopper script that he built, we were able to go through, give them general ideas on what kind of how much retail space they would have, but also be able to give them an idea of where we were cost-wise, which was incredible for a small organization like St. Anthony's, whose money is always an object. Goes through and it can generally it sets it up so that the hospital, we try to do as little as we can below grade, but we try to set these things up so that we go in and the medical center is here in blue, try to keep all that set up. And then it goes through and creates this donut with upper level retail. And then you can see that the towers, such as the ambulatory tower and then the bed towers, sit on top of that. And that's when you see the visuals, you'll see that there's a super truss that goes along here. And that completely allows us to use this as a large transfer level that frees us up from having to tie into the column systems down below. You can see in this, the idea that the section is really, really important. They wanted community spaces where quinceañeras and other things could take place, swimming pool here. So you can see that this section with the covered underground basketball courts on the ground were this just totally kind of fusion of all this great stuff going on at one time. We took to these when we did the bridges and looked a little bit at the Ponte Vecchio as a precedent for this. But the idea that the section tells a story, the health and wellness, which will tie into future charter schools, the ability of using that main green for entertainment, and then also being significant, like hospital that can actually serve the public there. This is an image that was done of what the exit or the celebration spaces would be. You can see here that in this concept here, we were trying to work with ideas with the Target and others where we would have a vertical version, just like they have City Target now in Chicago, that would hold down and be the main anchor for the retail side, with the hospital holding down the opposite. And then the main plaza here, where you can see the amphitheater and then the basketball courts, which can be changed over to theater. And of course, the umbilicals here with the super trusses that go along to help support the buildings above.
The best thing about the community is the people. They do so much.
I strongly believe that as we come together, not only as family, as people, but as organization and communities, there's so much potential to make a difference.
They have a connection to everything.
I'd like to see if you can get a health food store. Flower shop would be beautiful for them.
A jazz bar or something like that. Clothing stores, maybe a hair salon.
Quality stores that promote healthy, promote to be active.
Say if you want a meal or something, okay, have a cafe.
You want to train them how to eat the proper foods.
Well, we do need it. Education about cooking right.
Come on, we're going to have a seminar about diabetes.
The children at the school could come, play basketball, sports, build a soccer field / football field.
A variety of things, a swimming pool, things like that will get people to come in, and they won't look at it as just a hospital.
I think St. Anthony's should try and get your seniors, get involved with children, and mentor them.
Something to help them with schoolwork.
Teach them you can go to college. You can do what you want to do.
Public transportation is very important to us.
Get a little bus. Go and pick them up.
What really gets everyone is something that's dealing with like entertainment.
They have rooms that are going to be for people that are willing to rent out to them.
Even to have a birthday party for the kids. Music, dancing.
Everybody comes together, and I think they forget about everything. It's just happiness all over the place. Everybody's happy.
I love the direction that they're going into, especially when it comes to our community, our kids, our youth, our seniors. When they say the whole ball of wax, it's here. It's here.
That project is currently in a thing where if we can get through Mayor Emanuel and some stuff going on with the property, it'll probably start schematics here in the next couple of months. That's pretty much where that's where we're at. I mean, I hope that the one thing that I've left you with is the fact that as we try to put together, our projects, and you've seen that philosophy that it needs to have all three parts. And I hope that when you've seen this really quick splattering of what we've been doing over the last couple of years, you can see all of those parts coming together. I think the best work that we're going to do is still ahead of us, but man, it's really amazing to watch some of it take place. The last thing I wanted to do before I open this up, and I know I'm at time, is that I wanted to give a quick shout out. Some of these people you're going to know because some of them are your teachers and whatnot, but it's a team sport, and I really could not, we can do anything that we do at HDR if it wasn't for all the great talent that we have. And so, I wanted to say thanks to Trevor, thanks to Abby, thanks to Mike, thanks to Susan, thanks to Chris, thanks to Sarita, thanks to Matt, thanks to Bill, thanks to Kevin, thanks to Steve, thanks to John Crane, thanks to Tim, thanks to Mark, thanks to Matt, Jim, Jim, David, Matt, Ian, Matt, Lisa, and Jim. Thanks, everybody. Is there any question? I mean, I know that it's a Friday afternoon, but they said that I'm supposed to ask if there's any questions. Is there any questions anybody has before? Yeah, go ahead. From winning of the contract to opening of the doors, about 5 years. Oh, I'm sorry. How long did it take for Parkland to be completed from initial winning of the contract to finish of construction, correct? That's what you asked? Yep. It was 5 years. So it was about 1.5 years worth of design, and then the rest of it was construction. I guess I would say that everything we do on a regular basis every day works for a human environment. I don't necessarily know if I mean, are you saying that every day what we do is just to do it to make cash? Oh, I mean, I think probably one of those things is that architecture is one of those situations where everybody touches it, but not many people know exactly what it does to them on a daily basis. And it's one where if you do it well, not many people ever really notice it. It'll be one of those things that they just pass through it and know that it's great and life is good. If you do it bad, and that's usually when you want to go to Omaha, listen to some of the stuff that goes up on omaha.com, and they'll tell you what they didn't like. That's going on for us right now. Well, I mean, the one that we've done for the most part on there is like streetscape, the idea that no blank facades, retail frontage is going to be part of that, especially on the Capital District. The other one is the landscape corridor on the 11th Street that takes you from the mall to the new Capital District development is being taken care of. The other one that's interesting that if you've seen the building is the one thing that was really interesting in the charrette process before we settled on where we're at in the massing is originally a lot of the concepts were actually putting the tower to the north along Capitol Street. And one of the really significant reasons for the way that it would sit from an urban standpoint on Dodge was the reason that the tower itself was actually moved to the south and the parking garage was moved to the back, so that relationship between the activity going on the first floor and everything was right there on the street, and we weren't turning it into a blank wall. But then the civic space that's along 11th is probably the biggest area where we give back to the community of Omaha. It's one where it's going to be pretty much us in the building. I don't think we've ruled out the fact that we're not actually going to be doing tenants. So that was one of the reasons too that we ended up with a little bit smaller tower than what we had talked about in the first. But it'll actually have the possibility of we talked about integrated space where we might actually be able to engage a studio with the university or something like that as well. Does that answer your question? I mean, does it get close? Sure. There's a couple things I can't tell you, but I think that I'd be able to do that. But any other? Yeah. Yeah. The question was like, what did we? So what was the moment like when we talked or convinced the client to go with the idea of the names on the Parkland wall that were the names from that voted for the bond? And really what we did on that, it was, it was going back and looking at great civic buildings like train stations and others. All of those seemed to have entablatures that had names in them for all the great, the pillars of the society that had basically named those buildings. And we thought, wow, what a wonderfully democratic element here where people had voted for it, and we could actually go and put the names of all those individuals on the wall as opposed to just gigantic donors. And it took a little bit of doing, but what we did, if I can tell you the moment that it happened is we sat there and we decided that we really wanted to pitch this idea, and we were all sitting around there and he says, they're never gonna go for it. And so what we did is Steve LaHood, head of our AMS group, and I got together and we called a guy in Austin, Texas, and we said, we're gonna make a pattern and it's gonna be 4 foot by 8 foot, and we want you to basically adhere all these, we're gonna make names up and we're gonna make this pattern, and we're gonna take 2 4x8 sheets of plexiglass and we're gonna take them into the boardroom and we're gonna put them up against the window when the sun's coming in from the south. And we were gonna we put the curtains over them and talk to them. We told them the whole story about, this needs to be a democratic building. It needs to be about the people of Dallas County. I mean, this is a county hospital that is, looking to be something greater than the sum of its whole. And I said, the idea is that we would basically go through and, make all these people the center part of this circulation part. And so we opened up the curtains and the sun came through and they could see the dappling of the names on the floor. And it was pretty much at that point that the board was like, okay, we get you. And now we got to get through the legalese of how we get names on the glass, because I didn't realize that I couldn't just go grab the phone book and start scanning names out of that. They told me that wouldn't work. So, but I mean, that was really kind of the moment. Hopefully that captures what you're asking. Yeah, I mean, it took a little bit of, and I think if you know of any great concepts, just about any of, some of my peers that are in the audience, that when you have a really great idea that you got to go out on a limb with a little bit, sometimes you have to take a little bit extra risk and go way past what you might have in the budget to make sure that you sell the idea, because it's one of those things where they really have to trust that you know what you're doing. And when you did a one-to-one scale mock-up, that really put the confidence in the board that we knew it was going on, and they could also understand the real impact of what that would do for the building. Oh, I guess you're supposed to answer. The question is, what was the most favorite project that I've worked on? As an architect, I believe you're supposed to answer that it's the one I'm on now. But I have to admit, like right now, the healthcare for me is like, I know that it's not a sexy building type most times for everybody, but when you meet some of the people that the building affects, it's probably the one that touches me the most. Parkland always gets me because there's a 14-year-old girl who was part of the patient advisory committee who had been burned on 30% of her body. She was 14. She went to a little private school. She would always show up in her plaid skirts and stuff. And I could remember just the fact of probably understanding some of the pain and suffering that she did, and the fact that the buildings that we would do would help people in the future like her. RIC, I have to admit that one was one where I believe, honestly, folks, those people are going to solve the problem. So if any of us ever would sustain a injury that would sever our spinal cord or anything like that, in the future, those folks are going to they're going to figure that out. They are inspiring beyond words. I don't really know what to tell you when I see what they've been able to do and what they have been able to help their patients with. And then, right now the focal point element, is really frustrating because I'm getting a real test in Chicago politics and exactly what it takes to get, projects done there. But at the same time, what a fantastic, group of communities and stuff like that. And I guess just like Guy kind of fell in love with that group of people, it's become something where even though I live in Omaha, Nebraska, it's like I see, North Lawndale and Little Village is part of my mission in life now to make sure that we make that project a reality. I guess it's a hard one to answer. Any project I get to work on with my studio of people, I guess. How about that for an answer? That's a good one. Well, in our studio, the way it's set up is that we have, especially the way that it works, a lot of times I travel, people are back working, and it's interesting because usually when we have the opportunity to get together as a group, that's kind of like, even though when you're away and your head's down, that's kind of fast time, but I would say sometimes we get together as a collaborating element, like you saw some of the spaces where literally, let's say a Friday, you'd get back from a trip on Thursday, we sit down, everybody just kind of makes small talk, and then everybody grabs their laptops. We go around in one of the shred spaces with the projector and the whiteboard, and we go over what we've seen for the day or over the week. And it's one of those opportunities where we as a group have slow time. You're able to evaluate options. The other reason that I like the projector with the whiteboard is it takes away a little bit of the digitalness of it. You can actually use the whiteboard markers to actually mark all over it. So it's like we talk about, it's our digital, we call it digital bum wad. We take, iPhone pic of it, and, we can quickly go through a number of options. And that way we're not just stuck in the computer. If that's kind of one of the questions you're asking is that, you could literally, by hammering through with all this stuff, with the ability to do the parametric models and all of that it's like you never take a time to stop and just kind of sit there and massage it again. But that's one where it allows us to keep up our speed, but at the same time, it really is kind of a slow reevaluation time. Well, thanks everybody. I thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend, and hope nobody gets hammered next week with Snowmageddon.